Welcome back to 1% Weekly. This week we've got our final interview with Paul Avins, all about how you can get started in the wonderful world of business. I'm going to be looking at why the Duke of Westminster is worried about the London property market, but I'll also be looking at how the changes to stamp duty have actually helped a lot of people to get on the property ladder. For our final interview with one of my business mentors, Paul Avins, I wanted to pick his brains for those who are thinking of going into business and wondering how best to go about starting their own business empire. So Paul, this week I'd like to turn our attention away from the highly successful business owners that you mainly work with, because I often hear people say to me, I'm thinking of starting a business, or sometimes I actually suggest it as part of the way they can increase their income so they can invest more.
Yeah.
We all hear the statistics about the failure of startups and everything else. If somebody really wants to try and plan to succeed when they're launching a new business, what are the sort of things they need to think about?
Yeah, well, the good news is the stats on failures are actually coming down, partly because of the technology allowing you to start businesses in your spare time and work from home. And I always encourage people, I say, look, if you're going to start a business, if you've got a job at the moment, then make sure you go and test the concept in the evenings and weekends. And there are ways to do that without giving up your main job. Don't suddenly roll the dice in the hope that it will work. So for me, it's always that question of, look, get really clear. And I say, look, if you can't sit face to face with a potential customer and you're not really clear on the problem you solve for them, go out and sit in front of 10 people and say, if this was a problem for you and I could solve it, would you pay for it? And ultimately, if you can't get the first customer to actually give you some money to fund your idea, then it's probably not a very viable idea, and you shouldn't spend much more time and money on it. And I think, I don't work with startups as a rule; they're not my target market generally. But I've spoken to enough over the years that I can tell you some of the mistakes people make, and I've made this. I've started multiple businesses, and I did this where you go and spend a ton of money on a website or on design or business cards before you've actually got your first paying customer, in the hope that that's what sells, where actually the reality is you need to solve a problem for somebody and they need to understand the problem you're solving for them. And if you can't, you can do that face to face. You can just sit down opposite people, you can go and ask people, is this a problem? And if it is, can I solve it for you? And get some cash flow before you start spending the money. So for me, I'm always about, look, bootstrap it, start small, go out and get your first customer. If you get one, you can get 10. Get 10 customers, and now you've got a viable proposition worth leaving an employment to start growing.
That's true, and I think we've seen the people on things like Dragon's Den where they've been quizzed about some weird idea they come up with, and they've said, "Oh, how much have you put into this so far?" "Oh, 400,000, 500,000. What?
Yeah,
you've got no customers.
There's no excuse now, because if you just spend some time, you can go on sites like Amazon, you can go on sites and Google, and you can do the research and find out what people are searching for and what is the problem that they're trying to solve. And ultimately, money flows to value, and value is creation by solving a problem for somebody else, either with a product or a service. So you can find out if there's demand. That you should never have to guess if there's demand now for something, right? You're able to do research now. There's so many tools available. There's no excuse to go, well, I thought people would want this. No, biggest mistake you can make is to create a product on your hunch and your gut. Doesn't matter. Do the research, take the time, figure out if there really is a compelling reason or problem people are trying to solve before you launch anything.
And let's assume that, okay, they do that, they speak to the 10 customers, they get some positive buy-in, maybe even some first clients.
Yes.
The whole world of marketing these days is pretty complex, isn't it? So what are the kind of key areas they would need to focus on to get the marketing right without bankrupting themselves in the process?
Yeah, well, and the temptation is here to forget the fundamentals of good marketing, right? The first thing is you've got to be really clear on who your audience is. Right? So the most thing is be really clear on who your target market is and what their problem is. So know that first and foremost. Secondly, understand how to talk to that market. So for example, are they on Instagram, or are they on Facebook, or are they on LinkedIn? You've got to understand where that audience actually is and how to chat, how to talk to them, right? And then thirdly, you sit down and start figuring out what tool do you want to use to reach those people. Is it direct mail? Is it email? Is it ads? That's the last piece you go to. But so many people start with, I'm going to do Facebook ads, when they don't know who the target market is, they don't know how to talk to them, they don't know what their issues are, and now they burn thousands of pounds on Facebook ads because they've done it all backwards. So for me, it's about, look, understand who your target market is and where they're spending their time before you start trying to figure out how to market to them. And go and spend time with them, right? Get face-to-face with as many of them as you can first to figure out what are they talking about, what language are they using, and test things in a real world. I'm a great believer, test things face-to-face before you start trying to scale it with an online piece of marketing. But yeah, you're going to, businesses today, 90% of the research of the customer is done before they come to you. So at some point, you're going to need to understand how to communicate through video, online, in the various platforms that are out there, and that's all great information you can learn. And we teach people that when we run our 2-day marketing events, and teach people how to do that. But that's skills you can learn. But what you can't really learn is how to understand that there's a need. That's stuff you just got to go out and talk to people about.
Right. Okay. And I guess there are lots of tools available now, either free or close to free, where you can develop an online presence. But that's a blessing and a curse, because they're available to everybody.
Sure.
So, how do you make yourself kind of stand out from the crowd to become more of a potentially a trusted partner?
Yeah, I think we live in an age where nobody trusts anybody anymore. Fake news and those things. We don't know who to trust. So learning how to build trust, and trust is now actually, I think, the biggest single commodity. If I trust you and you've added value to me, then there's a pretty good chance I'm going to give you some money to keep adding value to me. So the whole way selling has changed. It's now much more about add value, build trust, show people you can get a result, and then people go, okay, now I trust you. Now I'm prepared to extend the relationship. And that's about having things like a really structured, what we call product staircase, and journey, and a customer journey that makes sense to the customer. So many people try to sell them the big product first and then wonder why it fails, and they're not taking the time. Everyone's in such a hurry, they're not taking the time to actually build the trust and earn the right to make a sale. People are in a hurry and they need to actually take the time to do those kind of things. And startups, because most startups are underfunded, they're in such a rush that they don't usually take the time to do it right. Yeah,
that's a very interesting point. I mean, obviously, myself working in the investment field, trust is critical. But what fascinates me when I look at our members is how long or short that process can be. So we've had some people that have invested with us 2 or 3 weeks after discovering us and joining the club. Others, it's 2 or 3 years later, and they consume all the content, they come to all the events, but at some point we cross this Rubicon of trust, and then we're kind of get a tick in the box, but you can't legislate for how long that's going to take.
No, and that comes back to understanding your customer demographic and the fact that different customers build trust differently. Some like to go quickly, some like to do their research, and I wrote about this in my book, The Authority Guide to High Trust Selling, where you really start to understand how to build trust with different personality types and different profiles. And I said to you, in today's world, you need to be able to think in terms of 4 different types of buying energy. People buy very differently based on their profile. So if you don't understand that and you try and only sell to the way you would buy, then you're cutting yourself off from 3/4 of the market, potentially. So yeah, I think as a startup, for me, the key thing is you've got to manage the cash. You've got to get cash flow, and actually, it can be about liquidity and making sure you've got enough cash to actually scale a business. Because most of my clients I've worked with who are growing a fairly fast startup, and I've worked with a few, one who in 12 months went from 0 to a valuation of 10 million. But the thing there we really focused on with them was it was all about, we had to make sure we had the liquidity, because the burn rate was 20,000 a month. So if they didn't have enough cash behind them, it doesn't matter what the valuation was, they weren't going to survive beyond 12 months. So, even as a startup, it's critical to know your numbers and stay focused on that management of cash, because it's the oxygen that keeps the flame of a business alive.
Right. No, absolutely. I think really it's fair to say that as you go through the various growth stages in the business, it ain't that your problems disappear. You just inherit a new set of problems.
They're bigger, aren't they? If I had a client recently, £35 million turnover business, had a cash flow problem, and they had to put 350,000 into the business in 7 days. That's a cash flow problem. If you've got a £10,000 a year business, you're going to have to put £350 in. It's just a magnitude of zeros, but the same challenges, they just get multiplied out in terms of size. So you've got to learn to solve problems, I think, and as a startup, your biggest challenge is learning to solve problems quickly, because you cannot afford to burn capital.
But I think one of the things that we haven't touched on, but I think is potentially going to come onto the agenda, is that with the massive developments in technology, artificial intelligence, etc., I think Ernst & Young was saying 30 to 40% of all current jobs are going to disappear. So becoming an entrepreneur may not be optional much longer, it may be mandatory.
No. And when I speak, I often say to people, how many of you work for yourself or how many work for other people? And I'll say, even if you work for other people, you're not understanding. You work for You Inc. You is the business, You Limited. I said, and you're selling your services to just one customer that happens to be who you currently call your employer. I said, but if you had the mindset that you're choosing to just have one customer, and then as we know, the most dangerous number in business is one. So what's going to happen is through that disruption in artificial intelligence, people are going to be forced to go and look for multiple income streams, multiple customers. So there's a fundamental mindset shift that we're going to have to go on as an economy.
Okay. Well, some great advice there for anyone thinking of starting a business. Paul Avins, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So there you are, 3 sessions with one of my own personal mentors who I've known for the best part of a decade. I hope they've given you some insight into why you need a business coach and what the issues and challenges are if you want to get into the top few % of business owners who really make a huge success of it. I've talked a lot recently about multi-generational wealth and long-established families. Well, I'm going to touch on another one today because we now have the 7th Duke of Westminster running one of the biggest property portfolios in the country. The business has actually been going for 341 years, so I think they've kind of got the hang of it by now. But there's some interesting numbers come out of their latest results, because on the surface it all looks very rosy, because what they've reported is that their annual profits are up 81% to £143.5 million. However, nearly half of its portfolio is international. It's not based in this country. And very few people seem to know that the Duke of Westminster is a major overseas property owner. He's actually got something like £9.5 billion net worth, and much of that is based on his foreign holdings, not just his British holdings. So although they announced record profits last year, the UK end of the portfolio only generated a growth of 1.3%, which is pretty anemic. And they actually began cutting their exposure to London's property market 4 years ago. See, one of the things you have to do as an investor is to look at what the smart money's doing. With 3 centuries of experience, much of it in the London market, these guys know when something's overpriced. They know that the market is cyclical, they know when to get in and out, and for the last 4 years, they've either been trimming their investments in London or certainly not making any new investments in London. They've been looking for better opportunities overseas because they can see that that's where the growth lies. So for me, there's a really important lesson here for us as investors. And clearly I think the message is getting out there now that yields certainly on rental properties in London are frankly pathetic. Add in clause 24 and all the new tax charges, and you are going to lose money. If the properties are not rising in value, and you can't eat capital gains, you just have to eventually realize them at the appropriate time. If it's not actually cash flow positive, it's taking money out your pocket, and rich dad, poor dad, here we are again. It ain't an asset if it's actually costing you money. So think very carefully about investing in the London property market. Start looking a bit further, perhaps even not just to the regions, but even overseas for better opportunities, because that's what the smart money's doing. They've been doing it a lot longer than you and I have. So let's try and learn a lesson from the Duke of Westminster. It's not often we bring you good news about tax on this programme, but it's now 4 months since the government decided that they would waive stamp duty for first-time buyers, and already 70,000 people have taken advantage of that, and they've saved an average of £2,300 each. Obviously, it's a much higher figure if you're in London or the South East, where the property prices are at their highest. And for them, they've actually saved an average of £4,300 each. So what we've got now is a real kind of a skewing of the stamp duty payment profile, because you've got the people at the lower end who are paying no stamp duty, but of course the properties at the higher end are paying record amounts of stamp duty because the rates have been increased so much. It's a little bit like we discussed recently about the disparities in income tax, where you have a small number of people paying most of the tax, whilst a large number of people are freed of paying it completely. So considering we don't actually have a Jeremy Corbyn government at the moment, this is quite a distributive tax program. So let me just give you a few more statistics. Receipts from stamp duty rose for the third year in a row in the last financial year, hitting £9.3 billion. And that was $2 billion higher than just a couple of years before. So people are paying more and being sucked into this more. So the extra stamp duty on second homes and buy-to-let properties, we've heard of this before, accounts for more than 40% of the receipts, in spite of only being just over 20% of the transactions. But let's not get carried away. What the agents are saying is that even this removal of stamp duty from first-time buyers has not kind of put a bomb under the market. Transaction volumes are down, and I think they're predicting about 5% down across the whole year. So whilst some people are definitely benefiting from this removal of stamp duty, whether it's really having the impact on the market that politicians hoped, it's too early to say, but certainly at this very moment, transaction volumes are down, prices are softening, and everything I'm hearing from property investors is that this is quite a tough market to sell into, and it's becoming quite a buyer's market for rental property, because people are thinking, oh, I can't sell it, so what I'll do is I'll rent it out instead. So you can start to see some very nice properties, perhaps £1 million plus properties, being available on the rental market at way less than you might have expected. So who knows, maybe this actually could be a good time to join Generation Rent and use the money from your home to get into better investments with higher returns, so that you can kind of rent your lifestyle and put your money into your wealth pyramid so that it's actually earning some serious cash for you rather than sitting in bricks and mortar. There we are, that's it for another episode of 1% Weekly. Thank you very much for watching. Do make sure you leave some comments below. Tell us things you'd like to cover in future episodes, and also just interact with some of the people who comment on the series themselves. Now, we often talk about alternative investments on this program, but one I want to mention with you now is whiskey, because somebody walked into a shop in Dubai airport recently and bought 2 bottles of whiskey. Thing is, they didn't just pay the kind of prices you might expect in duty-free, they paid $600,000 each for these 2 bottles of whiskey. They were Macallan 1926 single malt, to be precise. They walked off with the 2 and paid $1.2 million for them. I'll drink to that. See you next time. Thanks for watching 1% Weekly. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, you might want to click here to subscribe for future episodes, or you might want to click here to watch this other video. What are you waiting for? My arms are getting tired.